Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, let's get started. Today we're on Act 1, Scene 3, and we get a peek into Juliet's family and how she interacts with her family, especially with her mother and the nurse. The nurse's relationship with Juliet is far more motherly than the relationship Juliet has with her actual mother. Her caretaker, or Juliet's nurse, has a very personal relationship. They're very close, and like I said, she is viewed more as the mother than Juliet's true mother does. Juliet respects the nurse's opinions, she listens to her advice, and she respects her as a person. Although the nurse is quite different than the other Capulets. The other Capulets are very upper class and proper or formal, as we would say. Whereas the nurse is a little bit less refined. She is a little bit more on the crude side, which kind of is a equal balance to the Capulets and the Montagues. Why do these families hate each other so much? Well, the Capulets felt that they are far more formal and the nobler family than the Montagues. They looked down on the Montagues, and that the Montagues were this peasant like and crude and uncivilized group, and that is part of that's what stemmed to part of this hatred, where the Montagues felt like the Capulets were uppity and snotty nosed and so forth and so on, that this feud kind of grew from. Whereas the nurse is kind of in the middle there. She's a little rough around the edges. She's not prim and proper and formal like the other Capulets are. And she kind of fits the mold of not too hot, not too cold, but temperature just right mentality. And in lines 62 and 63, the nurse explains what her one wish for Juliet is, and that is that one day that Juliet will be married and be happy in that marriage, and not just a statistic of a young woman during this time that was married off to a relationship that she didn't necessarily want to be in. And as we've read about her father, it appears that Juliet, in fact, will have the opportunity to fall in love with the person that the father will agree to marry off to his daughter. But it's also very important here that this foreshadowing keeps popping up, right? The nurse's one wish is that one day she will be married. Well, hopefully that wish does come true. We will find out, and it's more important to know that she doesn't just want her to be married, but she also wants her to be happy in that marriage. And that's something that we can look for and as we continue reading. Again, we talked about how Juliet and Lady Capulet, her real mother, their relationship, right? It's a very formal type relationship where Lady Capulet doesn't even call her Juliet. Instead, she calls her daughter, right? Which is a very formal way of communicating. And so part of this reveals her character and her being Lady Capulet as this very formal and elegant woman. She is prim and proper to the T. But in this very scenario of this question here on line 66, as Juliet answers about how she feels about being married, it reveals that she hasn't really thought about marriage too much, and that kind of explains the fact of she's very young. She's probably too young to be thinking about marriage, right? And part of that is described in her father's hesitation to marry her to Paris at this time. But as all young females have, love is a very powerful factor and she believes in what one would call that love at first sight, right? She explains that she won't go above and beyond to force that love. She will notice him or she will interact with him, but she will not go any further into try to force that love. She, in fact, believes in what we would call love at first sight, right? She wants that fairy tale type relationship. Act 1, Scene 4, we go back to Romeo. And this line here, 25 and 26 and Scene 4, is very, very important. Right? It explains how Romeo feels about love. And in retrospect, what it means here is that he believes that love hurts. Right? Think of his past experience. He thinks he loves Rosaline, yet she does not love him back. Right? And if you can relate to that, where you care about someone very, very much, and that person doesn't necessarily feel the same way you do, right? You can feel that pain, and it's a tough pain. It's a pain that is very unique, right? And it's described here as rough and pricks like a thorn. Okay. Let's see. Don't necessarily need to go over these specifically. I'm kind of just leave them up here so that you can see what you need to. We might just go ahead and skip down to Scene 5, excuse me, of Act 1. Um, yeah. Okay, well, okay. Look closely at the lines 106 through 111. Why does Romeo feel uneasy about going to the party? And again, that party here is we're referring to the Capulets party. Romeo was invited to. He knows that it's probably not a good idea, yet he's also getting over that heartbreak between Rosaline, and he knows that Rosaline will be there, and he doesn't necessarily want to go, but he was persuaded, if you will, to go and try to find someone new. And so the reason that he has reservations of going to this party is that he feels it's too early to move on. He is still feeling the heartbreak. He is still has feelings for Rosaline. However, he fears fate might take his life at any time, so he needs to live life to the fullest, right? It's said, I don't know if kids still say it, but YOLO, right? You only live once. Right? He fears that he may not live long, and so he needs to live life, and so he decides to go. But isn't that strange? What a reason! Why would he? Again, that why is very important to ask yourself. Why would he just think, oh, I might not live long? People typically don't think that way, especially at his age. People don't think of death. And so a little bit of foreshadowing here. Maybe Romeo won't live very long, and that's a clue that Shakespeare is leaving for us to, as a reader, to take in and make note of, that Romeo himself even feels, I might not live long. So maybe that's something we should keep an eye on. Okay, so as I said a second ago, he is going to try and enjoy the party, right? He decides he is going to go to this party. He's going to have a good time, or at least attempt to have a good time. And obviously, that's very important to our story, but also to that plot, right? Think back to this format here. The exposition, it outlines the conflict and the characters. Well, we know the conflict is these two families hate each other deeply. And nothing more or nothing good can happen when they're together. we know that if there is a fight amongst the families, that it is punishable by death. Very severe. And so now you have a situation that's presenting itself where a Montague, Romeo in this case, is invited to a party held by the Capulets. Granted, he was invited by misidentification, but think of possible scenarios of what could happen if he were to be recognized at this party. Think of the consequences that it could have. A foil. Go ahead and define that term. Let's see. We can do that here. It shouldn't take us long to find it. Let's see. Foil. There it is. A character that is set up as a contrast to another, so that each one will stand out vividly. Right? They are supposed to be the opposites. Where were we? Here we go. And so you have these two characters that are the opposite of one another. One is more into his feelings and emotional, right? He's feeling the heartbreak of this love that could have been, should have been in his eyes. Whereas the other is more about just having fun, enjoying your time in the present, in the now. Not necessarily invested in his feelings. Okay, these characters are set up to be the opposite so that both stand out. So if you see that question on the test, identify what is a foil, and name two characters that represent a foil. The two contrasting characters. This would be an example. We're in Act 1, Scene 5. So we learned from Romeo's soliloquy. And a soliloquy, we remember, we talked about, is a type of monologue, right? It's that only the character and the audience are aware of. It's almost the inner thoughts is a good way to describe a soliloquy. Even though there are characters around them, or even on the stage, they can't hear what's being spoken in this soliloquy. It's important to remember the difference between a soliloquy and a monologue. A monologue, only one person is speaking, right? What I am doing right now is a form of monologue. It is just me. Whereas if we're in class and I'm asking questions and you're responding, that would open it up to a dialogue between two or more characters, right? A soliloquy is a type of monologue. Only one person is speaking here. But even though there are other characters present, they cannot hear what is being said. Okay, let me go back. Here we go. So we learned from Romeo's soliloquy that he is struck by love at first sight. Right there, again, that key sense, right? Love at first sight. That, remember, everything happens for a reason in a Shakespearean play. What was Juliet looking for when she said she would give Paris a chance, right? She was looking for that love at first sight moment. What was Romeo afraid of attending this party for? Because he felt he hadn't given enough time to heal from that heartbreak. He was afraid he was moving too fast, moving on too soon. And then again, a little bit of that dramatic irony. What did he say about Rosaline? That she was the most beautiful person he has ever seen, that he loved her. Yet, shortly later, he sees Juliet and is describing it as struck by love at first sight when he sees her at the party. Okay, and you can practice paraphrasing his speech in lines 43 through 52 and focus on how does he compare Juliet. Okay, and there's some examples there. How does this speech about his love for Juliet compare to his speeches about being in love with Rosaline? With Rosaline, he would just say, she is beautiful. He would call her exquisite. However, to describe Juliet's beauty, he would use these comparisons or metaphors to compare how beautiful she was. Again, going back to the very first thing we talked about with Shakespeare, it's so much more powerful for the author to use dialogue or actions and detail to describe something than to just come out and list it. Right? With Rosaline, he would just come out and list, she's beautiful, she's exquisite. With Juliet, he would go into detail in his dialogue, right? In speeches, he would say things, or in this case, a soliloquy. He would go through and through his own words explain her beauty by comparing it to other things that are viewed as beautiful, right? A jewel, a bright light, a dove amongst the crows. The chorus. The chorus here is very similar to the prologue. And it's important to note what type of, this is going to answer one of the quiz questions, what type of format or style is the prologue written in? And if we look at it, again, this is focusing on the prologue, it's 14 lines. There's a specific type of rhyme pattern here, a rhyme scheme, right? A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, G, G. Right? And those last two lines being a couplet and the 4 lines or a quatrain repeating themselves 3 times followed by a couplet, 14 lines. Okay? We know based on the meter that it's written in iambic pentameter. So a 14-line poem with an A-B rhyme scheme that's written in iambic pentameter is known as a Shakespearean sonnet. Okay? And it's written the same way here in the chorus. If we count the lines, there are 14 lines. The rhyme scheme is A-B, ending in a couplet, G-G. It's written in iambic pentameter. It is a Shakespearean sonnet. Okay? So you can go ahead and practice to paraphrase the speech. Again, what type of poem is this? We just explained that. Okay? It is a type of sonnet, specifically a Shakespearean sonnet. And it is important that we are able to, again, not just know what these things are, but to be able to identify it. And we identify it by breaking down poetry. Okay? And to do that, we have to know what makes a Shakespearean sonnet, and those specific categories, those specific rules, right? The specific, if it's A-B rhyme scheme, if it's 14 lines in length, if it is written in iambic pentameter, it's a Shakespearean sonnet. And those are some of the things where you just have to memorize that in terms of math, the equation, if you will. You just have to memorize that and be able to identify it. Okay, we'll go ahead and stop here and we'll pick up on Act 2, Scene 1.